I bought this 2018 YT Capra to answer one question. Are older mountain bikes still worth it? Let's find out. The 2010s was a wild decade of groundbreaking innovation for mountain bikes that drastically changed the sport and the trails into what we see today. Back in 2010, the decade started with 26-inch wheels being the most common.
The all-new S-Works Enduro, totally redesigned for 2010.
Most bikes had narrow rims, a front derailleur, no dropper posts, and tubeless tires were around, but not as common as they are today. Geometry on older bikes was vastly different too. If you take a 2010 Enduro bike and compare it to today's Enduro bike, man, that older bike looks like a modern day XC bike with an upright head tube angle and a super short wheelbase. But as the years went by in the 2010s, every year brands seemed to be pushing the limit with innovating geometry and parts. And 2010 saw the introduction of a super important dropper post called the RockShox Reverb. And at the time, it worked super well compared to all the other dropper posts on the market, and it caught on big time. In 2012, Shimano introduced the XTR derailleur with a clutch that helped keep the chain on and led to the death of the front derailleur on mountain bikes. Then SRAM fired back in 2012 and introduced the narrow wide chainring, which drastically helped keep chains from falling off while riding. This led to cassettes having these wide range gear ratios for the 1x drivetrains, and it paved way for the mass appeal of 29-inch wheels. Also in 2012, rim widths were pretty narrow, about 23 millimeters wide, until companies like Derby and Synthes started selling rims with 30 millimeters internal width. These wide rims were laughed at the time, but they slowly caught on over the decade, and around 2019, 30 millimeter wide rims became the standard. Then as the years went on, bikes became longer, slacker, right up until about 2020, where we've seen a kind of plateau in mountain bike innovation, although brands are still tweaking things here and there. But that brings me to the question, is an older mountain bike too old in terms of all the advancements that have been made in the modern era? Well, let me tell you about the 5 things that I looked for when purchasing an older bike like this 2018 YT Capra. Before I get too far into this, I know I'll get comments like, I ride my 2006 Gary Fisher every day. And that's great. Anything that gets you on rolling on the trail is cool, but I'm looking for an older bike that can hold its own with new 2024 mountain bikes. And I live in a pretty popular mountain bike town, Bentonville, and I rarely, if ever, see a 20-year-old mountain bike at the trails that I frequent. So with all the previously mentioned standards being changed in the 2010s, like bigger wheels, less gears, brands were also adopting standards like a tapered head tube and through axles for the front and rear. When I was looking for a bike for this project, I was really liking this 2016 Mondraker Dune, but checking the tech sheet and the geometry, I found that the rear axle is a non-boost through axle, and that becomes problematic when finding parts for upgrading or replacing broken parts. So I do not want a non-boost frame. Also, if a frame had a quick release through axle, that was also a no-go for me. So for this project, I wanted to have a frame with a 12x148 boost through axle in the rear. Then I found an older Santa Cruz. It was like a 2016, I forget the model, but I looked up the spec sheet and it had a boost through axle. So I'm like, heck yeah, man, this bike is perfect. I've never tried a Santa Cruz before. I kept looking, and then I saw something on the spec sheet that was super concerning about the rear shock. Around 2017, RockShox was pushing the industry to accept metric shock sizing. Before, it was kind of a mess with every brand seemingly having a shock size that was specific to their frame only, and some use inches, some use metric, and the 2017 Santa Cruz that I was looking at had some funky shock size like 217 by 63, and I don't even think that size is made anymore, and it would be pretty hard to find a used one that isn't like super blown out, so that bike was a no-go also. The final years of the 2010s, from 18, 19 to even 2020, we saw the consolidation of industry standards. Pretty much all bike brands adopted metric shock sizing, boost spacing front and rear, and another must-have for this project, a cable port for internally routed dropper post. It's definitely possible to find a nice older bike like say a 2015 Yeti SB5C. I've definitely wanted to try an older Yeti before, but if you want to use a dropper post, you have to go with an externally routed dropper post, and those kind of droppers are hardly even made anymore, so that's going to be a problem for me. Eventually, when I found this 2018 YT Capra, the bike was perfect on paper. It's an enduro bike made for 170 millimeters travel. It has a boost rear axle 12x148, and it uses an internally routed dropper, a tapered head tube, and the shock size is metric. All that together means that I can bolt on all the parts that are commonly sold today. Heck, I could even upgrade this bike over time with all the fancy new stuff that comes out. The geometry is actually pretty close to modern bikes. Long wheelbase, slack head tube angle, but the problem was the size. This frame is actually an extra large, and I usually ride mediums. Well, remember how I said that bikes have been getting longer and slacker? Well, bike sizing is still being changed today, and what used to be a large a few years ago is probably a medium these days. Shoot, 15 years ago, an extra large would be a small bike now. So usually the mediums that I ride have a 460 millimeter reach, and the reach is the most common number to look at with sizing. Well, this extra large Capra has a 480 millimeter reach, which I can totally do. I mean, my Polygon e-bike is a large and it's a 485 millimeter reach. And dude, that bike fits me perfectly. One last thing to note, this frame here is a 27.5 inch frame, but that's totally gonna work in my favor with this build. I actually think it's gonna be better than a 29 inch in this case. In my mind, the biggest reason for buying a 5 to 10 year old bike is to save money. And I got a killer deal on this frame. So this was listed on Pinkbike with the frame, 2 different rear shocks, a rear wheel, 2 tires, dropper post, headset, and bottom bracket for just $600. And I didn't even try to haggle them on the price. I didn't like say who I was or ask for a deal to make this video. And I ended up paying $100 for shipping. So with all that, we have this start to a super cheap, rad bike, but I'm not gonna know if this is fully worth it until I get this thing all built up, take it out on the trail, and to see if it's still fun to ride. And remember how I said that 27.5 inch wheels are better in this case? Well, that's because 27.5 is kind of dying out. Sorry to say it, it's dying breed, but dude, you can find 27.5 parts for super cheap right now. And I found this brand new RockShox domain fork, 27.5, 170 millimeters travel for just $180 online. And then for a front wheel, I bought this used one with a rotor for just 80 bucks on eBay. So man, this thing is gonna be cheap. Let's get this stuff installed. Well, I posted this build on Instagram, and it's funny, I got a bunch of messages saying that this older YT Capra is better than the new ones. Someone said it's their favorite bike of all time. So that's pretty cool to hear. I'm pretty optimistic about this build. And you might have noticed some scratching here and there. Actually, there's kind of a lot of scratches on the down tube. And this bike actually has a pretty crazy history. When I found this frame listed on Pinkbike, it was in Durango, Colorado, and the guy selling it is named Hogan Coesis. That was his username. So I searched his name just, you know, to make sure the deal was legit. Well, I found that he is one of the original guys that built the trails here in Bentonville with the Trailblazers crew. Hogan helped build Angel Fire, New Mexico, Spider Mountain in Texas, and is now working on a bike park in Colorado. So Hogan lived here and rode this exact frame, so it's back home here in Bentonville, and it's super cool that this bike has a backstory. You don't get that with a new bike. But with this being an XL frame, it does feel a little big at the body positioning while climbing, and that's one thing that's really been late to catch on is this seat tube angle on these newer bikes is so steep, and 2020-ish, 2018s, we're still kind of laid back. So that's kind of the last geometry number that was lagging behind. But a laid back C-tube angle doesn't even matter if you're standing up, hitting rock gardens, hitting jumps. So I think it's time to do that and find out once and for all if an older bike is worth it, if it's still fun to ride. All right, it's been a super long time since I've ridden a full suspension 27.5, a couple years. Let's see how this goes. All right, here goes the big drop. Man, this build was a total home run. And what's even old about it? I mean, yeah, the frame is a 2018, but all the parts are newer than 2022, and that's because YT was an early adopter of all the modern standards. But the plan for this bike moving forward is I think I'm gonna try to sell it. Flip bike, if you will. I'm gonna try to get like $1,300 for it. And it's a killer bike. It could sell super fast, or it might not because it's an older 27.5. But if you have an older bike that holds its own against modern bikes, let me know about it in the comments. Let me know the make, the model, and maybe I'll get one to try it out. I definitely want to try as many bikes as I can because I'm still trying to learn about what I like in a bike, and I just love trying all the different bikes.